Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is Carla from Rehan Allahwala's World of Connections. I've been doing shows all day. I almost forgot where I was. I needed to think it through. In any case, I am really excited. I am speaking to Jeanne Alford from California. I think it's Vacaville. Is that it?
Sacramento.
Oh, Sacramento. Okay. And we are going to be talking about her life, her work, and how communication is so important in English. And I am extremely, extremely excited about this. And before we go any further, I want to remind you, like all of my shows, we are sponsored by the Institute of Peace, which is an online organization promoting peace one conversation at a time. Having said that, Jeanne, will you please introduce yourself?
I sure will, Carla. Thank you for having me. This is exciting. I am Jeanne Alford. I am um, hmm, I'm a public relations and communications expert. I have spent my career working mostly in the technology industry and actually globally in technology. So this is really a great opportunity for me because I know the effects of having great language skills in getting your job done around the world. So I'm really excited to do that. And I've worked with some companies that, you know, some people know. Sony. I worked with the PlayStation division. I worked at Philips Electronics in their semiconductor and consumer divisions. And I also worked at Dolby Laboratories. So I got the chance to introduce things like digital cinema, sound for HD TV, and one of my favorites, their 3D technology for cinema. When I first saw the 3D technology, literally I thought somebody was throwing a ball at me. It's that good. And if you could imagine trying to put words around that, it was fairly challenging. So we did a lot of experiential kind of work to get people to experience the effects of 3D or the sound in high definition television. It was a lot of fun. But I know the importance of good communications, good messaging, and really being thoughtful and deliberate about what you're saying to your audience or to the person right next to you.
Wonderful. Now, how long have you been working in this work?
Do I have to admit to all the years?
You can take off 20.
Well, let's say it's been over 35 years. So, you know, when Malcolm Gladwell said you needed to have 10,000 hours to become an expert, I said, yes, I'm an expert. So that makes me an expert in communications training, in writing in general, and in public speaking, because I've done it. I've got my 10,000 hours.
When did you got your 10,000 hours? How many hours have you been working then?
Oh, I haven't figured that part out. There's math in that, but I'm sure it's way over 10,000 because it's been over 35 years of doing this. I would hate to put that number out there because I believe I'm still young.
But you are. What do you mean you're not young?
Well, my son would tell you differently, but you know, we're always old to our kids, and they don't mind reminding you of that. But I am a new grandmother, so I have to admit to a few years.
That doesn't mean you could have started earlier.
Well, that is true. That is very true. But I am young at heart and young in mind, and so let's see. I represent a different age to the world. How's that for an interesting message?
I like that. I like that a lot. Can I use that one too?
Oh, please. Many, many years ago, somebody gave me a planner, and at the top of the planner, it said, "Old is 15 years older than me, therefore I will never be old." And I have remembered that for my whole career, and I continually say it. The only person that really took umbrage, if you will, to it was my mother. And I pointed out that if she was less than 15 years older than me, then she would have had to have been 7 for my brother to be born. So she needed to own it.
Okay. I think that's cool, to be honest with you. And I am working on getting this tagged for you. And I have a quick question, which I wouldn't normally ask. What
Okay.
is your actual name on Facebook? Is it Jeanne Alford or is it Jeanne Alford Locke?
Jeanne Locke Alford.
Okay. So I have it correct, and I just need to make a quick change. And while I'm doing that, I know that you use technology often. So let's talk about that for a moment.
Okay.
I did something wrong. I'm figuring it out now.
That's okay.
How Now, I know you're in Toastmasters, which is what brought us together.
Yes.
And in Toastmasters, how do you use your communication skills using both technology and your regular speaking skills?
That's actually a good question. We've moved our Toastmasters meeting because of the pandemic to fully online, and we've been doing it for, it's been like 18 months at this point. And when we first started, we had a few hiccups, as everybody does. Zoom is very easy to use, but we didn't understand why you needed somebody who actually understood the technology. And we call that person a tech host. So there's always somebody online with us who understands how to spotlight when we're speaking, how to mute everybody, because there's background noise periodically. We get to know how to. We actually do double spotlight sometimes when we have in crosstalk, like during our table topics. So I've learned a lot about Zoom and other online streaming kinds of meeting places. I've used actually Microsoft's new one. Google has one. They're actually some of the CRM, customer relationship management systems, have their own versions as well. So there's a lot of different platforms out there to use. But we also had to get used to, how do you keep the energy up? How do you connect online when you're no longer in person meeting somebody? And in person, there's an interesting energy exchange. So it becomes like a party, if you will. Everybody supports everybody in the room. And, if you come in and you're feeling a little overwhelmed or a little down, everyone else is much, much more uplifted, and they can lift you up. And that's really an important part of one-on-one connections. But when you move from in the real world to online, you miss that level. And what we found was, it's in your voice, it's in how you present, it's in your mannerisms, it's in trying to keep your gestures in frame. Because, well, look at my hand right now. It looks really huge, but it's actually in perspective. But the first time I saw it, I was like, ew, I've got huge hands. But it's not really true. Somebody else seeing it is going to see it with perspective. I'm just being overly critical. So we had to learn not to be overly critical of ourselves. And most people were reacting like, I'm not good on video. So one of the first things we did was have a little workshop with our members and talked about things to do to make your video better. Things like, I have a little light up here. This morning when I was talking, I was a little dark because I had to move from my regular computer to this new one because of technology problems. So I pulled out this little light and put it in front so that I'm not so dark in the face. So understanding the lighting, understanding how to make sure you have a fairly simple background so that you stand out. Those were just a couple of the basics. And then how do you use your computer screen so that you're actually looking at the camera? You're not staring down. A lot of people stare down because that's how we're looking at the people that we're interacting with. But we have to remind ourselves to look at the camera, because there's a remarkable change when you can do eye to eye and you can just spend even a nanosecond to connect. Now, I'm talking just to you right now, but the viewers that might see this, they may think, oh, she's talking to me, because that's how video works. So getting people a little bit more comfortable, looking at the camera, not looking at the person you're talking to. It's a skill. It's a skill that we have to practice. I still find myself wanting to look down a little bit more because I like the interaction of seeing how you react to the words, because that's how I communicate. But I've had to learn to focus on the camera and then look down and then look like, which is that part of connecting with the audience. In Toastmasters, we train our speakers to look beyond just the person in the front row. Connect with the person in the back row, look to the left, look to the right, connect with the whole audience. And when I'm looking directly at you, the person sitting next to you thinks that I'm looking directly at them. So in the real world, that's a skill we've been working on. So in the online world, we needed to tweak it just a little bit. And so there's ways to use technology that assist us and help us get our communications across in a very authentic way. And that's what we've been focusing on.
Do you think that what you are learning by using technology will carry over for better speeches when you are in person?
I do. I actually do, because we moved from having this wide stage to having to move to a little bit of a smaller stage. So when you do that, you have to concentrate a little bit differently. There's a story about an American actress, very well known globally, Julia Roberts. And Julia Roberts, in her early career, she could not do anything wrong, right? She's America's sweetheart. She had hit movie after hit movie after hit movie, and she tried Broadway. And the first time she was on Broadway, she didn't get great reviews. And it was because working on screen, you have to have very subtle expressions and subtle ways of moving the energy around, if you will, because you're working on a smaller screen, where in a Broadway theater, you have to be huge. And that wasn't her forte. So she had to learn a whole different way of acting to make that Broadway time a success. Well, we're doing a little bit of the opposite. When we're speaking on stage or speaking in a business presentation, we're in a bigger stage. We can use the whole room. We can connect with people in the back. We can use gestures that are broader. You can build holograms on the stage, if you will. So if you have 3 points, you move to the right, you move to the left, you move to the center. and you can make your 3 points, and you just keep going to those points when you continually build on them. So there's a way to interact with space, and then being able to move online and have that same level, but in that smaller screen area, it becomes a great skill, because I don't believe online is going away. It's not like the CEO of IBM when the computers first came out, and he said, not it was the guy somebody who did typewriters, and computers first came out, and he's like, oh, it's just a fad. Well, look what happened. They've taken over the world. In fact, this little thing that we have, that we carry in our pocket, has more power than the first computers I worked on 30, 40 years ago. So we need to be open that technology becomes a platform that moves us forward. So getting comfortable with technology and communicating and connecting and building relationships, these all work together.
Now, I'm curious what you would say, but this entered my mind many times when I'm in an English room. People say, I cannot speak English, and that's not true. In your thought, and my answer is, yes, you can, and you just spoke it beautifully. Let's move on and stop saying cannot. Do you think that this technology will help people learn faster and gain that confidence?
I'm not sure about the speed. However, it gives more opportunity, so it could be faster. I think the important part is the opportunity to connect with people around the world and to practice. I've worked with many, let's say, global executives. The word foreign just doesn't seem right, but I worked with several Japanese companies in my early career, and I've worked with the folks at Philips who were Dutch, and I've worked with German folks. I've worked with French folks. I was able to travel to China and Korea and Japan for my job. And I will tell you, almost to a person, everybody spoke great English, because here's the thing about communication. It's exchanging information. Now, if you think about it just directly, that one thing, exchanging information. There was one time I was in the Netherlands, and I had to get on a train to go from Amsterdam to Eindhoven, where Philips used to be headquartered, and I wanted to take a bio break. And at the time, you needed to pay for toilet paper, and I didn't have Dutch as a language, and the person that was the attendant didn't have English, but she said she did this, just put her hand out, and I put my hand out and had the money in my hand, and she pulled out what she needed and put the toilet paper in my hand, and I was able to go take care of business. So there was a way that we communicated even without the language. It would have been much easier had she had a little bit of English, but I was not in a big urban area. I was in one of the villages. That said, when I was traveling in other countries, I always kept that in mind. Not everybody speaks English, so you have to be able to communicate non-verbally as well. However, my experience when I'm working with other people, they speak great English. I might have to work on my listening skills because there might be a heavy accent, and I might have to ask them to slow down because they may speak a lot faster than my ears are letting me hear. But that's also part of communication. So I've found it very easy to do business in other countries because language is not the barrier. They know basic English, and these executives practice it fairly regularly. And if they hadn't, then I'm able to help them practice some more. I actually had a nanny. Well, I called her a nanny. She was a babysitter that came to my house every day. Well, I was very lucky for 1 year. She basically wanted to learn English. She was from Mexico and spoke very little English. But by the time that she left and went back to Mexico, she was pretty good. And the reason that she became my babysitter was she wanted to learn the language and she wanted to practice. And in that actual space, I wasn't allowed to learn Spanish. I needed to help her learn English. And it was just doing it, talking over and over every day. And like I said, by the end, she could string a sentence together and she was very cogent in what she was saying, which is, she went back to a job that needed her to speak English. So it's practicing, it's getting on something like this, and talking with people around the world, getting adept at listening, which is a skill we all need to practice. Even if you speak great English, chances are you're not listening very well. So one of the things that somebody who's speaking English that's their second language, they've learned to listen, to learn new words and to learn new phrases and sometimes change how their mouth works, because our words are completely different than, say, the Japanese language. But we have to also listen, not just for the content that's being given, but how to get the words from when they're speaking, because it becomes a beautiful exchange when we actually can connect verbally and non-verbally. And listening is one of those skills that we don't pay attention to enough that we should. And that makes the conversation work a little bit better when we take the time to actually listen. So I would commend anybody for not only wanting to learn English, but for practicing it and talking to native English speakers, because then you'll learn the vernacular. I know my son knows every dirty word in Spanish, for example. He doesn't know any other Spanish, but he knows the bad ones.
Sounds like a typical kid.
Yeah.
Now tell me, if we're talking about this, what can I do to help people feel comfortable speaking the first time? You seem to be a real expert in this, and I want to learn from you.
Well, I think how we approach it makes a big difference. You were a teacher in your other life, and so I'm sure you had students who were introverted and didn't want to speak up or were afraid to put themselves out there. And these are all natural things. But I'm relatively sure, knowing you now, that you were pretty gentle at coaxing them out. What we need to do with the folks that are nervous or worried is be gentle. Allow them the space to be who they are. We're not asking for anybody to change their language or their culture or anything. It's adding a new skill. And adding a new skill that broadens their world a little differently is exciting. But where we think it might be easy, we need to acknowledge that it's not always easy based on where you're coming from. For example, I'm really good at math, or at least I used to be. And then I walked into a class called calculus. And if there's ever a class to take that's going to turn you away from math, if you're not going to be a programmer or an engineer or anything, it's calculus, because it's so complex and so overwhelming that the college I went to, they actually had calculus for non-engineers. Well, think of speaking English like calculus. To some people, it's just perceived overwhelming. But when you break it down, and you help them one step at a time, then they become part of the process, and it becomes easier and easier. Now, going back to that calculus example, I had a tutor. Well, he was my ride. We shared rides. We were both commuters to college, so we shared a ride. But he offered to help me with calculus because I was banging my head. Boom! Why don't I know this? Why don't I know this? And he actually said something to me that I've carried throughout, and I've shared it with many people. In calculus, it's the science of logic, but it's like cooking. You have a recipe. In calculus, you have formulas, but you learn everything you can, then you let it cook in your mind while you go off and do something else. And then when you look at the formula again, it's going to look much simpler because you've let it cook in your mind. And I didn't think it was that easy, but I actually passed the class because of that piece of advice. So whenever I approach something that looks daunting, which could be speaking in another language to a group of people who speak that language natively, I want people to think about this, to think about it, to consider what they want to say, to let it kind of bubble and boil in your mind, and then come to a platform like the English Speakers Foundation that you have, and practice, because that's what it takes. It takes practice. And I got to tell you, I've worked with executives throughout my career, and they thought they knew how to speak, but they spoke in a language I call technobabble. They could speak for 5 minutes and nobody in the audience would know what they said. And I had to help them break that down and learn how to say things like, with this chip, you're going to get the power of 8 Pentiums. You know, with Dolby, we had a technology that was virtual that we put into phones. So I got them to say, with this technology in your phone, it's like having a cinema in your pocket. So they got the idea that it's really good sound on a cell phone, which, believe it or not, 10 years ago wasn't thought, people thought it couldn't happen. But now we have great sound on phones. So it's breaking it down to digestible bites. That's why you need to let it cook in your brain a little bit. You break it down to digestible bites. There's a fairly often used cliche, how do you eat an elephant? Poor elephants. It's just an example. You eat an elephant one bite at a time. So that to get used to speaking and to get more confident, you have to speak. So keep that as step one. You have to speak. To improve and feel more confident, you have to speak again. So it's finding venues like your foundation that allow you to speak and practice, and when appropriate, get some gentle feedback. I would say go to a Toastmasters that's focused on speaking English, for example, because the feedback we give in Toastmasters is invaluable. I actually encourage all of my members to become evaluators before they even get up and speak, because evaluators, you have to listen differently, in the sense that you're looking for what could this person improve, and then the way we evaluate, you tell them what they did really great. You talk about areas that they could stretch in, and then you start talking about the impact of their talk. So when you walk away after giving a talk, nobody browbeats you, because that's not the purpose. We've actually listened, giving you some stretch goals. And by stretch goals, I'll share the stretch goal that I often hear. For me, I'm a very calm speaker. I can get into a meditative tone. I actually think I should do meditations and see if I can sell them. However, I've learned through Toastmasters that I need to have some vocal variety. I need to get excited, and I need to get quiet sometimes. And I often like to do the little bit of a twist where I get really quiet when I drop a great piece of advice. Because people actually come in, they lean in to listen when you come down, when you become a little bit quieter. So there are lots of platforms out there that you can get good advice and great practice. But it's practice, and when you think you've done it, you practice some more. That's how I train.
I agree. Let me mute you. I agree that practice is the answer. Someone was asking, do you teach through, well, he said to teach through structure or formula, or to teach them without it. There is structure when I'm doing my English show. Everyone needs to speak. Everyone speaks to each other. But at the same time that that's going on, there is also that understanding that we practice, and it's the practice that comes at the moment that makes the learning successful. Do you want to speak to that point so they don't always hear it from me? Or I would like to have your opinion on it.
Well, sure. The question actually boils down, do you have a set of steps, so it's structured, or is it open conversation? And I think you need to have a little bit of both. You need to also think about, my favorite piece of advice is you have to think about the 3 magic questions. What is it that you really want to say? Why is it important to the person you're talking to? And what do you want them to do? And if you can think those through, whether in your native language or in English, you think those through, then you have a more effective conversation, because you're not just filling the air with words, you're actually trying to move something forward. So there is structure even in how you speak, whether it's in a class or not. There's structure in, what is it I need to say? Why is it important? What do I want them to do? And I want to underscore, why is it important is not to you, but to the person listening to you. That way you can figure out what they need and provide the information they need. Now, in a classroom, that might be a little difficult, and you need to do the exercises, but there also needs to be some free-flowing conversation. So, for example, I listened in to one of the last foundation classes, and you had a young man. It was kids, and you had a young man talking about how he wanted to go to university and he wanted to be a doctor. And he went on for a while. It was very interesting to hear his life from his perspective. And I was impressed that you gave him a lot of space to talk, because I thought he came across really well. I didn't know that he was speaking a different language than what his native language was, because I was just listening. I wasn't watching it. So it was just the quality of his voice. He had such confidence when he was talking to you, Carla, that I thought, this guy's got it down. He's gonna do great. I hope he comes to America to learn. But alas, he chose London. He's gonna go to London. But I was impressed with the quality of his communication. I also could tell it wasn't his first time being there. You obviously had a working relationship with him, and that it lightened up my heart to listen to the kids, to hear them practice and to hear them try. And then he was followed up by somebody else who wasn't as well practiced, but seemed fairly confident enough to push through it. And that's the other part, pushing through whatever fear you have that people are going to judge you because you're not speaking it right. There's no right or wrong. It just is. It's just working through getting your words out, and nobody should judge you for that. And so keep stepping forward. I was a single working mother, and people used to ask me, how do you manage this job that you have, which is really demanding, and a 2-year-old who's clearly hyperactive, and all the things you do with your church and with all the organizations? How do you manage it all? And I just took a deep breath and I said, I put one foot in front of the other, one foot in front of the other. And that's been a working philosophy I've had for my whole career. And that's a philosophy that people that want to get better at English can do. The one foot in front of the other is find a place to speak to somebody, ask somebody for advice, find out if I'm saying the word correctly, put things in writing so that you're working left brain and right brain and melding the two, so that the structure is the left brain kind of teaching, looking at grammar, looking at how to put a sentence together. And the right brain is, what is it you really want to say? Look at poetry, read poetry, watch movies. You can watch movies in any language on Netflix now. And what I like about watching movies is if you watch it in their native language, you can follow the lips and teach yourself some words by following what the actors are doing. And I've known many people who've learned English by watching soap operas on TV. So you don't give them a soap opera. You give them a chance to really practice, and that's beautiful, because as you said earlier, we're changing the world one conversation at a time. We're hearing people, we're hearing what they want to say, and that's a beautiful thing. Hearing somebody is just as important as saying something. You're muted.
I know. Thank you. I do want to add, because Takvim is bringing up the issue of making mistakes. And I tell my students that you want to make mistakes because that's the only way you learn. The point is, and I love this quote that I heard that I'll be paraphrasing now, you speak only what you know, but you learn from what you listen. And if your students are afraid to make mistakes, and I often say this on my show now, everything is absolutely right about you.
Yes.
And the reason I say that is that no one is perfect. And the only perfect you can be is the perfect you. And
yes.
If you're being the perfect you, it doesn't matter if you're making mistakes, because that's who you are. I'd like you to speak to that point, because I say it a lot.
Okay, I have two thoughts that come up. One is, there's only one thing we can control. Only one thing that we can control in our life, and that's how you react to any given situation. You get to choose. And in some cases, it's like choosing, when something happens, you get to choose heaven or hell. And what that means is, heaven is peace, serenity, acceptance. Hell is chaos, fear, whatever that is. I choose peace. Whenever I have that chance, I try to choose peace. It's the more positive one, but what that means is you get to choose to react emotionally and worry, or you get to choose to react deliberately and thoughtfully. So if you make a mistake, you say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I think I made a mistake. How do you say this?" Or whatever's the appropriate response. You just own it. That's how you're going to learn. And the other thing I want to point out is, if any of your listeners have ever done anything in art, drawing or painting, if if you take a class, and we have a lot of classes now that they're called sip and paint, where people are drinking wine while they paint, which I think would be kind of disastrous. If I drank a glass of wine, I would never get the line straight. However, when you're spending a lot of time on a piece of art and you see something that you've done wrong, is it a mistake? If you look at every single master, you're going to find one of those mistakes. It's what makes the art unique. It's what makes the art so different that nobody else can copy it. So when I see people put pictures of their classes where they've gone to these sip and paint classes, and you see 3 or 4 people holding up their paintings together, I find it fascinating that they all got the same instruction, but each painting is different. There's a different in the perspective, or there's a different in the color. There's differences. And we might think of those as mistakes, but they're not. They're beautiful. So each mistake you worry about is actually something to build on. And if you change how you think about mistakes and you realize that making them help you grow, then you're going to go into a place like this and practice and allow those mistakes to come. Yeah, I would tell the folks that I was training, the executives I used to train, I was like, make your mistakes now. We're in practice mode. Get them out of the way so that when you get up to do the keynote, nobody's going to know. The last thing I want to tell you is I used to play guitar for a folk choir in my church. When I was a teenager, I just thought I was it. The bag, the whole sandwich and bag of chips. I'm playing guitar. I'm up in front of 1,000 people. And then I hit the wrong chord. The first time I did that, I went, and a woman that was in the congregation came up and she said, I just want you to know, if you don't react, none of us would know. So from then on, when I hit the wrong chord, I didn't react. And she was right. Nobody knew. So I say make those mistakes, learn from those mistakes, make yourself vulnerable to learn and open to growing. That's what we're here for. That's bringing the love into the world and changing the world, allowing ourselves to grow, to crack where we need to crack, and to blossom. If you have a broken pot, what happens? You see a piece of the plant come out through that crack. It makes it more beautiful. So welcome them.
And I think it's really, am I mic'd?
Yeah.
I think it's really important for us to realize that when you are teaching anyone, you teach them that mistakes are a part of learning. That is something that I said when I was teaching my special ed students, and I brought it with me when Rehan got me to do these shows, because mistakes are a part of learning. Who cares? And actually, when you come to my show, the one thing that I make very clear in the beginning, the only thing I'll always correct is if you call a lady Mr., I'll change that to Miss or Mrs. or what. Or you say a lady is a he. That I'll correct because many people won't like hearing that. But anything else, I don't correct because it's more important to say it. And how to face it, I'm going to answer this, and then I want Jeannie to answer it. You just accept yourself as you are. And you are learning every moment, every day, no matter how old you are. So if you want to learn, you allow the mistakes to happen because that's how you learn. Jeannie, I pass it over to you.
I want to acknowledge that there's an inner game that there's voices in our heads that they're thoughts basically, and sometimes those thoughts take over. So they say, "Oh God, you made a mistake. Oh heavens, you can't move forward. Everybody's going to look at you. They're going to judge you." Well, that voice needs to be quieted down. You need to listen to it and say, "I understand that you're afraid that people are going to judge you, but that's not what we're about. We're about learning." And so you have to have that inner conversation with what I call the committee, because we have all these different voices. But listening to what Carla just said about mistakes help you grow, mistakes help you learn, reposition them in your mind. Mistakes are actually meaning that you're doing something. Mistakes are that you're trying, and honor yourself, celebrate these things, because these are great steps forward. You know, when you make a mistake and you own it, you learn from it and you move forward, chances are you're never going to make that mistake again. But that's part of who we are. If you just um, look at any picture, or picture drawing a circle, it's just a flat circle. But when you start to shade in, think of the shade as the little mistakes you make, and you start to shade in on the side, and then you come out a little bit lighter and a little bit lighter, your circle becomes a sphere and it becomes 3D, and that's art. So maybe you shadowed a little too dark where it should have been lighter. Well, that would be a crack in the sphere. That's all part of putting the picture together. Owning it and being comfortable and welcoming of that basically kind of darker side, making the mistakes, means that you're a real person. You know, there's an old saying, to err is human. Well, yeah, none of us came here knowing how to build a fire, but we had, early man had to learn how to do a fire. None of us learned how to use a computer. We had to be told. We had to be shown. There's lots of things we had to learn. The point that I want to make is, even in as basic as breathing, we make mistakes. Most of us breathe at the top of our chest, which is the breath that we learned when we came out of our mothers. We learned how to breathe after the doctor spanks you on the butt and you start crying. It's the upper lungs that are being used, because that's what you need to survive. But as you start to learn practices like meditation or Tai Chi or a number of different things, you learn to breathe deeply all the way down to the bottom of your toes. And that changes how you think, that changes how you respond to things. You have to practice that. Opera singers don't come out of the womb as opera singers. They had to practice how to do this special breathing to get that real depth of tone. They have to practice. And can you imagine how many flat notes somebody like Luciano Pavarotti hit to get the voice that he has? We all do it. And then it becomes muscle memory. And muscle memory means that you do it automatically. That's why we practice. You're muted, sweetie.
I hate this.
That's one of the things we learned when we moved online. We have to gently say, "You're muted. You're muted, sweetie." Yeah.
I like what he wrote. Mistakes are the journey to success. I say that every day. I like that he wants some tips about slowing down and speaking a bit loud. And I don't want to take much time from you, but these are all tips that I give in my shows every day. So come to the show and speak with me.
And remember to breathe, because taking the deep breath does help you slow down.
Breathe between words, especially when you are speaking another language. It allows you to grow and develop your speaking skills. You have one last question. Please write it in the chat. I think we're answering all of his questions right now.
Well, there's one I see: sudden reaction to a life that causes trouble. we
We're
face.
not really going to get into that.
I would just say we face crisis every day, and that's where deep breathing really comes in. You recenter yourself with that breath, and then you can respond versus react. And the difference in my world, responding is deliberate and thoughtful. Reacting tends to be more emotional.
And calming down those emotions is very important.
Yes.
Jeannie, we have been speaking a lot longer than I had planned. But let me ask you one more thing. Do you want to leave our audience with some knowledge?
Sure. I have an ebook that's available to download, and it's at beclear101.com. That's BECLEAR101.com.
When we're finished, Jeannie, you can drop that in the chat.
Okay. And it summarizes my 3 magic questions of, what do I want to say? Why is it important to the person I'm talking to? And what do I want them to do? And it explains why those are important. And that's the kind of thinking that I do training for, to get people to be more effective and get their points across, get their message out. And I think it would be great for folks to read it, just so when you get ready to speak to Carla in her classes, you know what you want to speak about. And that's a giant step for being more confident in what you're in the languages that you're using and what you want to say. I think I commend you, Carla, for the work you do. I know that it's going to make a difference in the world. And I just, in the United States alone, it's going to make a difference, let alone globally. But when we can all communicate, exchange information in a thoughtful, deliberate way, it will change the world. So I thank you for that.
Thank you. And I do want to mention, and I think this is important, people don't realize that many of the people I speak to online speak better English than some of the people who have crossed the border from Mexico or from other countries, come here and begin speaking English.
And I would add to that, a lot of people understand the grammar side of the English language better than some of us adults who speak it every day, because they actually learn it versus just showed up to class because we know it. I'm always impressed when somebody can point out, a part of the English language that I haven't thought about since my English classes in high school. So I say, good on you guys. Keep making us think too.
And I really appreciate what you just said, because it's so true. We are all learning, and no one is better than anyone else. And everyone puts on their pants one leg at a time. I don't care if it's the president of a country or the janitor in a school. We all do certain things one thing at a time, and we are doing well. And with that, I want to remind you that this show was sponsored by the Institute of Peace, which is responsible for creating peace one conversation at a time. Thank you so much, Jeannie. Thank you, everyone who watched. And now it's time to wave goodbye. Bye-bye, everyone.